The Strength Beyond Struggle podcast brings you mental health stories from the front lines. We're sponsored by Ending the Silence, a program by the National Alliance for Mental Illness, NAMI, funded by the Arizona Healthcare Cost Containment System. We bring you the stories of people with lived experience. We do not offer therapy for any mental health condition and cannot substitute for professional assessment and treatment. In every episode, we deal with difficult mental health topics, including suicide. So if you're struggling, remember, you can always get help by calling 988. Welcome to the Strength Beyond Struggle podcast, and I'm here with Mark Shafer, who has this story of living with grief due to suicide, because suicide, I don't know how it is, but it's touched his life more than a lot of people. But there are a lot of people in this world. CDC says 50,000 a year die by suicide in the United States. It's a big issue. And the survivors are the ones, and I want you to tell their story and how to live with it. Exactly. So to help those with that and with other people, including people like his brother, and he'll tell that story, he started an organization called rayoflightproject.org, and we're going to talk about that too. But let's start with when suicide and grief and all of this first touched your life. You were very young.
Right. It was my second year of high school, and I lost a dear friend who I played on the soccer league with in junior high. It was the first inaugural round of soccer at our junior high school, and we were teammates. And by the second year of high school, he had become so overwhelmed with things and lost all hope, and he made a decision to end his life.
And it was heavy for you, wasn't it?
It was.
How old were you at that point? 14, 15?
No, I was probably 17.
17?
But at the year before that, I had lost my locker partner into being hit by a car and killed. And then the year after that, I lost another, classmate. So I had 3 funerals in 3 years. And it was it's very life-changing.
Well, you started, what I'm saying is that, the age, it sounds like it started around the age of 16, these
right.
things. So your friend dies by getting hit by a car, which is just a tragedy, and it's a shock, and that kind of thing ripples throughout. And this is what I think a lot of people don't acknowledge.
Right. Well, I went to an empty locker the rest of the school year. He was never there. We didn't share the locker like we had planned to. So it was a daily reminder of the loss. And then the next year, to lose my friend to suicide was it was another emotional landmine or emotional explosion in my life. And then the senior year, one of the star football players, he was hit by a car and killed as well.
Well, did you know that in Arizona here that suicide is the number one cause of death for our adolescents? Unlike in the rest of the United States, the number one cause of death is death by guns. And so here in Arizona, and I'm wearing a shirt that says Ending the Silence, and you're here to help me do that. And the silence about mental health, because a lot of your stories, your friend who decided to end his life by suicide, he probably had, just anxiety. He didn't have the coping skills to handle life's kind of bumps, right?
Sure. Or he didn't have some place safe to talk about those things. I was blessed that my mother saw the need for counseling, and I was able to start into counseling in high school.
So like after the first tragedy, she got you into that, or it was?
It was probably after the second one. It reflected in my grades and my...
Really?
Of course.
Your behavior? How did your behavior change?
Concentrate.
Yeah?
Anytime... I call them emotional landmines. You step on something, or you either hear somebody say something, or you see something. There's something that reminds you of that loved one you lost. It literally is an emotional landmine. Boom, here comes all the emotions. Well, as young men, when I was before I learned to drive, my father used to jump on me, and when he saw me crying, he said, "You're too old to cry. You're going to be driving a car now." So I did exactly like my father said.
It's associated.
And I started stuffing.
Yeah.
So now I got a recipe for a pressure cooker without a safety valve. And my mother kind of identified some of the things, and she helped me get into counseling. And
so she saw behavior that wasn't normal for you, and she recognized you needed a little help.
Right. And I did act
brave of her way back then.
Yeah, it was very, it was not common. This was in the mid-'80s.
Yeah. Yeah. No.
So,
I got a different response when I came to my mother about my bulimic behavior.
right.
So, it was at the time. And actually, high school counselor, I've interviewed her, and she said the one good thing that social media has done has opened up the conversation about mental health.
Absolutely.
And that's why we're here, because you've had a long journey. So you're in the high school, you've had 3 deaths of friends.
Right. So for me, college was out of the question. That was 4 more funerals. And my family never understood that decision. So I went to a 6-month automotive school. It was, they had Mercedes and sponsorship, and I graduated school. I just wanted to get out. And I even left Colorado and moved to Arizona because I just needed to get out of that big, overwhelming emotional situation.
And I want to stop right there, because as I've gone through, I've now done 14 episodes of this podcast, and I've learned a lot.
Right.
And what I've learned is that people forget that thoughts and emotions drive behaviors, and they want to ignore that emotions are part of the equation for all the engineers and mathematicians out there who don't believe that emotions are real. So what you're telling me as a man is that, so what are the kind of things, you said it was a pressure cooker. What kind of, can you explain some of the behaviors that were pressure cooker behaviors?
Just so much that when your family doesn't understand, they just want you to get over it. Well, get back to your old self. Well, I hate to break this to people. We never get over anything. The love that we have for the person we lost never goes away. We'll always love that person. Yeah. We just can't physically express it in person anymore. So now we have to find other healthy ways to be able to deal with.
And so what were some of the unhealthy ways? Because I know I had an unhealthy. So what do you do to self-medicate, just to help the audience understand what are the options out there?
Colorado at 18, you could drink 3-2 beer. So when I turned 18, I was buying gobs of beer, and we'd all go out and
get schnockered,
and we'd throw back the beers. And, I started smoking cigarettes. And I found what was really interesting was that grief affects the lungs. If you look at Eastern medicine, they say grief affects your lungs. Well, how many times has somebody told you horrific news of somebody passing and you have a hard time breathing?
Yeah.
And it's because it's correlated with the lungs. So for me, the smoking was a coping mechanism.
Like a habit, almost like an emotional crutch, sort of?
It was, kind of. Okay. It was a distraction. Okay. And so it becomes just a calming mechanism for the emotions. You see it all the time. People get extremely frustrated at a situation, and they step outside and they just have a cigarette. Well, the thing they're doing without realizing, you're just going outside and taking deep breaths. So it's that breathing that you're...
But deep breaths are a whole lot more healthy than exposing yourself to nicotine. So that's what I'm trying to also say in this podcast, show people that there's so many different ways to handle these, big emotions, like you said. And emotions hurt, don't they?
Absolutely.
Especially grief.
Well, and when I never really grew up, understanding my emotions, and I'm very empathetic.
Sensitive man, in other words.
So, well, I pick up on other people's emotions they touch me deeply. And that comes through in my songwriting and my poem.
Which is a new coping technique that you ultimately came to accept and use now. And that's what is a big part of a Ray of Light project, right?
Right. So I wrote my first song in 1985. And it was a very simple song that now I've changed the arrangement. But it wasn't until 1994, when I lost my brother Ray, that my music became my outlet to be able to express my emotions. What I couldn't speak about face to face with someone, I could write in my little song lyric book. And
so what did you need to get over about the death of your brother Ray? Because nobody in the audience knows what happened to your brother. Was he after the 3 high school friends?
Right. So it was 82, 83, and 84, the 3 years in high school. And then Ray was in 1994. I had moved away. I had started a family. My son was 3 years old at the time. And I came home from work one day, and my wife had come down to tell me that my brother was no longer with us and that he had ended his life. I was just out of the blue. So what was the first thing I did? Self-medicate. I went down to the store, bought a pack of cigarettes, hadn't smoked for a long time, and I bought a pack of cigarettes. I bought a big bottle of rum, a bottle of Coke, and I had a smoke and tossed back some drinks to, say goodbye to my brother. And that became a habit that lingered. And it was probably a good year before I found a support group, survivors of suicide, through Impact down in Tempe.
And during that year, what happened? Did things in your life?
I needed the self-medicating, and things were falling apart. And my wife at the time was telling me to get over it. Mm-hmm. And it's a really challenging thing for me when somebody says get over something. Like we can't
deny your feelings.
What I picture is like in the Raiders of the Lost Ark, if you jump over that big boulder, now all of a sudden it's chasing you down the mountain, and you're trying to outrun it all the time. So rather than get through it and take the pickaxe and break that boulder down to manageable pieces, and then eventually to dust and sand, it doesn't make sense to get over it, because then you'll be chased by it.
But you need help when all the messages you've been told is just get over it, don't you?
Sure.
And that's what the support group did?
Right. It was people that are going through grief and at different stages. Some were very early on and they're losing their loved one, and some had been multiple years, and it gave you hope. When you see the people that had multiple years through the grieving process and they were slowly putting their lives back together, it gave you some hope. It was light at the end of this big tunnel. Like I literally thought I was going crazy because I didn't see any of the rest of my family going through these emotions. And
Ray of Light Project has a specific purpose, because your brother Ray, you found out after he died.
Right. I found out at the memorial service when we were sitting around the table after it was over that he had been diagnosed schizophrenic 10 years before that. So for 10 years, my family decided it was better for me not to know about it. And
that's heavy.
But my brother would always come visit me, no matter where I lived, he'd visit me. And I think it was because I didn't have that blinders or those lenses on and looked at him as defective because he was schizophrenic. I was always my same true self to him, and he was very comfortable.
Give him.
And so indirectly, I believe that was by design, that it was meant to be that way so that we still had that great connection. And then which for me, it made it a little harder to take and swallow that pill when I was back there, that my family had kept that from me.
I'm sorry, I get hard to breathe when just thinking about being at your funeral service and saying, wow, my brother had schizophrenia. So Ray of Light Project, actually, you hope through your music and this thing, which is a whole other story that we do on another podcast about your music and how you use that.
Right.
Instead of self-medicating with alcohol and nicotine.
Sure.
But those are drugs
that
affect the body, and people need to understand that they can be, a lot of people, we talk about moms with wine now and this kind of thing. And it's a hard, in our culture.
And there's acceptable coping mechanisms, shopping. People do shopping therapy all the time. They go out and spend money they don't have. And
there's lots of things people do.
But I think we seek that feeling of numbing out the heavy emotions and feeling good about something. So when we get a new clothing or a new phone or something, it feels good for a while, but then that wears off, and then we're seeking that again. So,
and we still have that emptiness. So
still haven't processed
how does that
emotions.
Support group help you face that emptiness and your big emotions?
So the biggest thing was knowing I wasn't alone. That other people felt those same deep emotions, and that even though each grief is as unique as a fingerprint or a snowflake, they all had key core challenges to overcome. But just knowing you could call somebody and say, you know what, I've had the world's worst day, and I don't even know, I'm feeling so many emotions at once, I can't even identify them. And they go, you know what, I've been there, and I'm just going to talk on the phone with you. Let's talk about something, absolutely anything else, but or we can talk about that. But they were just there to lend an ear. And
so I wanted to ask you, because Ending the Silence primarily works with middle and high school students, in this support group, you actually wrote a song, a very powerful song that makes me cry, about a young woman who lost her father.
Right.
And she was, and can you because a lot of the kids that are watching this, they might have had a parent that died by suicide.
Right.
And so, and I know in my town, I know some kids whose parents died by suicide, and I see them out in the town, and my heart wants to go out to them, but so please tell me that story about this young lady in your support group.
So the mother of this gentleman that had chose to end his life would come to our support group. Very, very sweet lady. And she got permission from our our group, the facilitators, to bring her granddaughter because her granddaughter was less than 10 years old. And she was nervous about going to the children's group by herself the first time. So grandma said, well, how about you come with me to my group and you can see how it works. And as I sat there, we always put our chairs in a circle to be supportive, and now everybody was equal. And she sat across the room from me with her grandma and told me the same emotions that I was being completely, paralyzed by at 30 years old, and she's going through them now at less than 10 years old. And my immediate thought was how incredibly sad that this little angel now has a broken wing. And and
why does she have a broken wing? Can you explain that, what you said?
So I asked the facilitator after our meeting, I says, how does a child grieve like this? Well, children can only grieve to their emotional maturity. That meant she had to grieve it as an 8-year-old. And then when she had another emotional growth, maybe a 10 or 11, she'd have to grieve again to that new emotional maturity. And this would be an ongoing process till she reached her emotional maturity as an adult. So it would be a revisitation as each growth of her emotionally happened. She had to re-grieve.
What a heavy burden. What a heavy burden for a child to get through. And so in your story of school and when you were young and how it affected you, I've heard stories in my local town of children who have lost their parents due to drug overdose or an accident or health, whatever the reason, they died young. And teachers have come to other teachers and said, why is this child acting so strange? They're staring out the window. They can't focus. They're not. And the one teacher said, well, did you ask her about losing her father? And in middle school, did you know she lost her mother? Don't you think that's a lot? And so, as someone who's doing with ending the silence, not to bang that, what do you think as an adult that people can say to someone who has lost someone to suicide?
So I had I can't remember who it was, but one of my mentors had mentioned, we are given one mouth and 2 ears. And if we'd use them in that ratio, listen twice as much as we speak.
I like that mentor.
It's amazing. Sometimes people don't need you to fix the problem. They just need to
know that you care.
Get the words out. They spin around inside their head for days and days, and they fix
them that it's okay to talk about it.
A lot of it's a trust that has to be earned. So they may open a little bit, and then you totally entrust that, and you don't speak to anyone about it, and give them that safe haven where they can feel like they can open up about the more complex things, because nobody wants their dirty laundry aired out anywhere. And the best that we can do as a supportive friend is offer to listen, empathize with them, say, I can't believe how much this must weigh on you, or how difficult this must be. And
because none of us can imagine.
We can't imagine, because every grief is unique.
But we know, we can say, I see you, but I can't imagine what you're going through.
Right. Yeah. And I'm here to listen if you need a friend.
Right. And that's enough for people?
A lot of times just speaking about it kind of lets the pressure come off.
Huh.
It's because we have these thoughts we fixate on, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And when we can speak them out of our body, then we go on to the next part. And for me, it was almost therapeutic to be able to speak about things, knowing that it wasn't going to come around and smack me in the back of the head because somebody wasn't keeping confidence.
Well, but because everyone in that room was going through what you went through.
Right. We all had a shared
understanding that this is very personal. It's very raw, very painful. And it's not something to be taken lightly.
Right. Only in the room we talked about it, or on a phone call. We had a phone list and we all volunteered. Everybody put their phone number down. And so if you were in the middle of the night and everybody said, call me in the middle of the night.
Oh, wow. That's
how it can hit.
And I have found, as I do this work with mental health and hear the stories again and again, I hear that one of the critical ways for us to heal as a human is to connect. Sure. When we disconnect, that is when trouble starts with our mental health.
Right. Isolation is not how we were made. So
right.
We are social beings. And even if you're introverted, you still have at least a few friends, a few people.
That's all you need.
Right. One great friend is worth 100 fake ones, as I always say. And there was another speaker that I had listened to. He had said that if you have 5 friends that you know would jump in front of a train to push you off the tracks and save both of you, he says, count yourself blessed. He said,
those are the friends you want to call when you're having this grief about
right,
suicide, or if you're thinking that the world is better off without you.
right. And that's not true.
And they believe that, though.
The problem is that if you think about when someone loses that hope, they're like standing in a corner, and each wall is all the pain they're feeling and the emotions they're overwhelmed with. They can't see out of the back of their head the 20 or 30 people that are reaching a hand out saying, hey, if you need help, I'm here, because all they can focus and fixate is that pain and the emotions, and they just want it to stop. They just don't want to hurt anymore.
And that's what people don't understand. I learned that from my daughter, who has bipolar and ADHD, and she had suicide ideation before we got her the medication she needed.
Right.
And she told me ultimately, Mom, it just hurt.
Sure.
Can you imagine? She's bipolar. It shakes. The brain shakes. That would hurt. Yeah. So to have empathy that it's not something that they want to do to get back at someone else or anger. It's literally they hurt and they want it to stop. And if we understood that, yes, and had empathy for that and said, so how in ending the silence, we say to reach out and say, are you really thinking about suicide? Is this a plan for suicide? Like if you're giving away your goods, if you're telling them, the world's better off without me, or you start talking about a plan about things. In ending the silence, we say, these are the warning signs to say, you need help. I'm here. I love you. You might not think I love you, and you might really hurt, but please, there's something other than suicide.
Right. It's like the old, I heard this a while back. When you pass away, there will be 6 pallbearers that carry you to your resting place. Those 6 friends, imagine if they helped lift you up before you passed away.
How would they feel?
So,
yeah. But I understand what you're saying, that pain, because my daughter said it too, and she had a physiological reason for the pain.
Sure.
So it makes sense. And the younger generation, the 20-somethings I talk to, they're not at all afraid to talk about, look, man, I got like bipolar in my family. I got schizophrenia. It's okay. We're taking medication. They're telling their parents, I need to take medication. I need counseling. My daughter taught me, because our generation, you've been in it a lot longer.
Yeah. So I joked around that we grew up watching the Partridge Family, but I lived with the Ostrich Family, because a lot of times things got really heavy and emotional. We buried our head in the sand.
So did mine. But that was the
culture. Right. That was the way they were raised. And
by the way, this culture, and we're from the white culture, but I've heard from the Black culture that how their euphemism for that is not ostrich in the sand. It's let's pray for you, and then put you on the porch with a rocker and a glass of lemonade and rock it out.
Right.
And then the Hispanic culture is let's pray, and do some rosaries, and, so everyone has a way, but what they're not doing is facing it, saying it's okay. It's okay.
They're not talking about it. They're just expecting you to figure it out. And that's the challenging part. We're not meant to do this on our own. The resources out there are so important for us to, get connected with. NAMI does a phenomenal job connecting people that need help with those that provide the help services.
We actually are about education and support, but you're right. In the support, we'll be talking like you and I are talking like right now. I mean, I did not realize that a support group for family members, survivors of suicide victims are so important to really reaffirm to each other, you're not crazy. These emotions are big. They can ruin marriages. Sure. They can destroy careers. They can ruin your health. Please take them seriously and treat them as you would cancer or diabetes, right?
Absolutely. So we have our physical health, our emotional health, and our intellectual health. So we can't ignore, you see people that focus on their physical health that may not have dealt with their emotional, or they may not have the intellectual, that they don't develop themselves and continue learning new skills. To me, that's important. I want my brain to always be learning something. And then my emotional growth is having to come to terms with, okay, I'm suffering from normal. These are normal emotions, but they don't feel normal because they're so big and overwhelming. My song, The Gift of Grief, I talk about, thanking my brother facetiously about the things, thank you for the sleepless nights. I didn't need to rest. Thank you for the semi-truck you parked upon my chest because you couldn't breathe. And
that's what I love about your music. And we have another podcast about your music, and you give a little sample. But if people want to buy the music, that's what Ray of Light Project is about. Is that you're making a record.
We're doing a full record, 12 songs and a spoken word track. And the whole goal is to use the funds from selling the music. And I'm also looking at doing T-shirts and hoodies and other things with some of the artwork my son did for the nonprofit. And that we want to create an endowment. We want to create this big slush fund of the monies, because a lot of people don't get enough counseling on their current health insurance, or they don't have health insurance. And I want the Ray of Light Project to be able to fund grief counseling or counseling for those, so they don't lose hope, that they will be around and they won't break an angel's wing. And
thank you.
It's just, I don't ever want people to feel that isolated and lose that hope, that light at the end of the tunnel.
Thank you.
That's the Ray of Light Project.
And, it kind of excites me to be able to do a podcast and reach a lot of people and spread your message farther than just our small little community.
Right.
Because you are on the web, rayoflightproject.org. I'll have a link to it and resources and things and questions to follow up after this interview. But thank you for being with us to talk about a really difficult subject and to give us some hope.
You're welcome. We're hoping, before Thanksgiving to have the full album out. It'll be available to download first, and then eventually I will be making CDs.
Wonderful.
Because I know everybody tells me it's a dying technology, but there's so many people that like to have something physical to take with them.
Hey, man, you live in a rural area, your internet can go out at any time, and having backup analog is pretty nice.
So,
anyway, thank you, Mark. Suicide touches almost everyone at some time. The number of suicides in the U.S. has increased by more than a third in 20 years. Last year, 50,000 Americans decided to take their own lives. Another 1.6 million Americans attempted to take their own lives, says the Centers for Disease Control. Men are 4 times more likely to succeed in killing themselves as women, mostly because they use guns. And guns account for about 54% of all suicides. Tragically, Arizona's suicide rate is 1/3 higher than the national rate. The suicide rate increases with age, but rates are rising fastest right now among teens. Experts are debating the reason for the rise in suicide. Suspects include social media, isolation, and the lack of mental health care. But rising rates of depression may also play a role. Here are some studies from the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. The risk factors they found are a family history of suicide, childhood abuse, neglect, or trauma, access to firearms and drugs, prolonged stress from things like bullying, relationships, or unemployment, stressful life events like divorce, financial crisis, or other loss, and exposure to suicide, including graphic or sensationalized accounts. A lot of people also show warning signs, so look for these signs. Talking about feelings of hopelessness or having no reason to live, feeling like a burden to others, feeling trapped, feeling unbearable pain, an increased use of drugs or alcohol, withdrawing from activities, isolating from family and friends, calling people to say goodbye or giving away good prized possessions, aggression, fatigue, and changes in sleep patterns. If you see something, do something. You can call the 988 crisis line. You can also provide a safe way to talk about what they're feeling. And if you're feeling despair, reach out to family, friends, or a trusted adult for help. Here are other steps you can take. Seek help for underlying mental health problems. Limit access to lethal means like guns. Provide or find family and community support. You can find that support with your local chapter of the National Alliance for Mental Illness. NAMI has support groups in many communities. Some help the people in crisis. Some help the family and friends in which they rely. You can find a way to contact the NAMI chapter closest to you in the show notes. Remember, you can make a difference, and people do get over the despair that leads to suicide. One Harvard study found that 9 out of 10 people who attempt suicide do not ultimately die from suicide. 1 in 4 make a second attempt, but only 7% ultimately die by suicide. So it's not hopeless, and you're not doomed. So let's end the silence and save ourselves and the people we love.
It's okay to just be me. We're all made to be unique. It's okay to have my needs. It's okay to be me. What's easy for others are struggles for me. I do things differently. Doesn't make me broken. It just makes me me. People out there help me through, ones who care about me and you. Through my struggles I find my strength. Feels so good to be me. What's easy for others are struggles for me. I do things differently. Doesn't make me broken. It just makes me me. People helping me to get through have their own struggles too. Even though they have their strength, they are human like me. Through these struggles we build our strength. We all want to feel healthy. Even though we make mistakes, struggles build our strength.